Hi, this is Aaron Bhaskar from BKBB. Welcome to a brand new week. Monday morning, our 26th episode. And BKBB is another part of Bhaskar Ki Business Baatein. Bhaskar Ki Business Baatein comes once a week with policy analysis, stories, and conversations. BKBB comes every day on weekday mornings at 8:15. And thank you very much for being with us today. And as always, we look at news behind the news. And we'll pick up three very important developments. But before I begin to talk about the developments or the headlines, let me introduce you to my co-anchors. There's Katya here. Welcome, Katya. And there's Isha. Welcome, Isha. And together we shall talk about three different topics, each one of them which could be considered quite significant. I'll begin first by talking about, and the three headlines are, and the first one is mine, where we're going to talk about what is going to happen to the world, recession, breakup of trade, etc., etc. The second one, we are going to talk about India versus China and the startups debate triggered by Piyush Goyal. And the third one is how only 12% of High Court judges have declared their assets. Let me begin first with my story. And the story has an anchor where yesterday, in a speech that went viral, the Singapore Prime Minister gave a 7-minute talk on how Trump's tariffs were going to mean the end of global trade, free global trade. And he said this is the beginning of capricious decisions and even wealth destruction. He talked about how the world will go through difficult times. And he talked about how even countries like South Korea and Japan, which were once very close to USA, are now talking to China to see what solution could be found. Ironically, the only silent player in the global stage is India, which does not want to have retaliatory tariffs. That's understandable. Singapore also does not have retaliatory tariffs, but has refused to talk to the rest of the world for a common strategy of how to counter the USA. But that's another story with bigger ramifications, with more serious ramifications. But if you look at Bloomberg's chart, which is the first chart on the left-hand side, you'll find that there's a consensus, near universal consensus, that global GDP will fall. Look at the second bar chart on the first chart itself. And it will tell you that fears of recession will go up and destruction of trade will also go up. You will have a situation where the world is becoming a more frightening place to work in, to live in. And when this is happening, just watch the kind of narratives media is playing around. I've got two charts above which talk about the trade that India has with China, and the second, the trade that India has with USA. And almost every media group has talked about the alarming increase in import from China. When we import from China, most of the imports are items that are used for Indian exports. Without those imports, exports would not have taken place. When we import from the USA, they don't necessarily go to exports. And if the imports from the USA are just $40 billion plus, now India has already committed itself informally to an import of $400 billion. It's going to bankrupt India. India has also agreed to allow the US to bring in agricultural produce, which is going to destroy India's agriculture in ways that nobody's imagined. Surprisingly, very few people in the media are talking about the disasters of imports from America. But this is media narrative that's part of the trade war that the US has unleashed. Why? That's another story. We'll talk about it sometime later. But let's go to the second story. And the second story is one where uh, Katya is going to talk about what is happening when ministers speak about something. Katya, could you have your story?
So, Mr. Piyush Goyal has triggered a huge debate, sir, when he actually, in his Startup Mahakumbh, which was held recently, the Union Minister actually put out this chart saying what is India doing, what are China startups doing. So, basically, China is miles ahead of us in terms of technology, in terms of especially after DeepSeek, everybody is taking a relook at China's technical capabilities, tech capabilities. But India, if you look at it, even though we are outsourcing hub for IT, we have never done this kind of deep tech innovations. So and these digital new era digital businesses which have come in are focusing exclusively on what he actually said, like food delivery, etc., etc. If you look at the most valued startups in India, they are Flipkart, they are Ola, they at one point in time it was Oyo, Byju's also before it went down, Zomato, Razorpay, none of Dream 11, Phone Pay, none of them are particularly have done anything spectacularly inventive to get it. So this is one side of the story. While a part of it is right, a startup is only just as successful as the amount of and the type of funding it receives. If you look at it, these deep tech, very little of the funding is going into AI or the startups. The only exception being Krutrim AI, which is Bhavish Agarwal's startup, which had received money 2 years, 1.5 to 2 years back, and turned it into a unicorn. Otherwise, there's very little money flowing into these robotics or AI or these deep tech generative AI kind of startups. So I just want to get your thoughts in, sir. What do you think is the issue here? Are we have never been innovative, whether it is pharma, whether it is IT. We have been in the sectors, but we have innovated very little. A little part of it could be true. And in deep tech, do you think you can make a difference, or we are we even trying, is the question. Because there are a
Well,
lot of smart Indians abroad who are doing this. They're just not doing it in India. So where is the gap?
well, there are two things where Piyush Goyal first loves criticizing people. He criticized the staff when he was railway minister. He criticized everyone in the power ministry when he was power minister, and now he's criticizing the public. First, people are courier boys and delivery boys in India because they have not been given the education to migrate to other fields. Our education system sucks. And Piyush Goyal should see why many people are going into these areas. Second reason, for AI to develop, you need patient capital on the one hand, and you need good education on the other. The best patient capital that came in was 5 years till 5 years ago, when almost 80% of India's startups, even unicorns, were funded by the Chinese, till the government banned the Chinese. So those kinds of investments also dried up. Third, whenever a startup comes up, people are ready to give the startup to begin a business, but government rules and government compliances kill many startups. So there are three areas, all in the government domain, which Piyush Goyal does not talk about. And that is unfortunate. These boys and girls are trying to make a living in a hostile environment. Help them with more tax breaks. Why did you bring the angel fund tax? Help them with more incentives to learn a new skill and stop talking about language and religion in schools. Let them focus on science and maths.
STEM,
Now,
STEM
this is
learning.
where I find that Piyush Goyal's statements are unfortunate. And please remember, you can put in the comments and ask your questions. We'll take up the questions at the end of the show. And now we go to the third story, which again talks about an alarming situation, and that's where Isha. Isha could be happy.
Hello, good morning. Hope you're having a great start to the day. The story I'm going to be working with today is from The Hindu, and it's titled 12% of judges in High Court have declared assets. So, the discovery of the partially burned currency notes at the residence of the High Court Justice Yashwant Varma has sparked discussions regarding transparency within the judiciary and corruption. While this has triggered a full court meeting on the 1st of April, wherein 33 Supreme Court judges agreed to make a full disclosure of their assets, the High Court is still an alarming number with amongst the 769 judges that serve in the 25 high courts of India, only 95, which is a mere 12.35%, have chosen to disclose their assets and liabilities on the official website. Since asset disclosure is not mandatory, currently only judges from 6 high courts have disclosed their assets, the names of which are on your screen. As you can see, the Kerala High Court leads with 93.18% of judges having disclosed their assets, with the Himachal Pradesh High Court following closely with 91.66%. In contrast, the lowest disclosure has been from the Chhattisgarh High Court, with disclosure from only 1 of the 16 judges, followed by the Madras High Court, with only 5 out of 65 judges disclosing their assets. Interestingly, the Delhi High Court has 7 of its 38 judges declaring their assets, a sharp fall from 2018 when 29 out of 35 judges had made their assets public. Interestingly, this data of the asset disclosure of previous judges has also now been archived. The issue of transparency and accountability in the judiciary has long been plaguing our country. The Supreme Court first attempted to encourage disclosure of assets in 1997. However, the guideline was not followed. Then again in 2009, but again, the guideline was not really abided by. And the majority of the judges have chosen to not volunteer this information. Following this, in 2023, a parliamentary committee on personal public grievances and law and justice suggested a law that would require judges of the Supreme Court and High Court to file yearly asset returns and create clear guidelines on asset disclosure. However, this was never implemented. While MLAs and MPs are required to disclose their assets, it seems rather illogical that the same is not applied to the judiciary. It's high time that asset disclosure stops being a voluntary recommendation and becomes a recommendation from all judges. That's all from my side. Thank you for listening. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, sir.
Thank you, Isha. A very, very critical news item. When judges prefer to keep the assets secret, it creates an environment where corruption becomes easy. Judges need to declare the assets. And yes, the government need not smirk and say, yes, the judges must be controlled, because the government wants to bring in the NJAC to monitor how judges work. Instead, the judges should strengthen their own internal mechanisms so that the independence of the judiciary, of the legislature, as well as the executive, that independence is maintained. The government has a track record of corroding institutions. Look at what's happened with the Election Commission. Look at the way the government gave a sinecure to Justice KG Balakrishnan, even after investigations proved that they are disproportionate assets. The government protects the corrupt. And that is why it is imperative that the Supreme Court creates guidelines to make sure that every judge discloses assets just when he's joined, and every year to see whether his assets have grown. But yes, it's a very, very valid question. Thank you for that story. And now we come to the questions. People have started sending the questions. But before we go to the questions, let me remind you, please click the subscribe button. Click the like button. It helps us when we know that people like our program, and also tells us what we should be doing more often. And finally, tell your friends about us so that more people can come in and join this program. We cover things that many people don't cover, and that is why it's important for the country. One of the first questions that has come up is, will the world face recession? Of course it will. The Bloomberg chart clearly showed that 90% of people now expect recession to be around the corner. Please remember, the last time tariffs became mandatory in the US had a recession in 1930s, a depression which hurt the US tremendously and the world a little bit. This time, it will hit the entire world. Frightening, but true. The second question is a little tricky. Should there be a penalty for judges who do not declare the assets? Yes, there should be a penalty, but not by the government, not by the politicians. It should be something that must be developed by the courts so that the independence of the judiciary remains sacrosanct. There's a third question. What should the solution be for meaningless statements made by ministers like Piyush Goyal? Piyush Goyal should realize that instead of castigating people for being where they are, he should also introspect and understand why they are where they are. The failure to improve the police, to give autonomy to the police, is the government's fault. The failure to provide education is the government's fault. The failure to provide Medicare, government's fault. All these three are important. Education and healthcare are constitutional requirements, and the government has failed. So instead of criticizing people, please remedy these first. And if there's a corrupt judge, don't give him a sinecure. If there's a corrupt bureaucrat, don't give him a sinecure. When the government gives a sinecure to a corrupt party, the government is actually encouraging corruption. And there are lots of cases where sinecures can be shown. Anyway, that brings us to the end of the show. Thank you very much for being with us. As I said, it's a Monday morning. Have a great day ahead. Have a great week ahead. And do tune in tomorrow. Most importantly, tell your friends about us. We would like more people to know about what we are doing. Take care. Have a wonderful day ahead.